Welcome to Thrive in Design, a podcast about making money and beautiful interiors as it relates to product-based businesses in the interior design industry. Each week, we'll discuss innovative strategies on how to approach product development and design sales in a shifting market. I'm your host, Nicole Lachey Ben. Welcome back to the Thrive in Design podcast. I am so excited to be here for season 3 of this podcast. My name is Nicole Lachey Ben, and I'm the CEO of Thrive in Design. Thrive in Design is not only a podcast, but it is a design and innovation consultancy that helps interior product companies increase their revenue and brand awareness. And we do this by taking a human-centered approach to how we dive into the customer experience or the designer's experience with your brand and creating strategies from understanding that customer experience. So again, this is season 3 of this podcast. When I started this podcast exactly a year ago, it was just a thought that I had in mind to cover topics from a different perspective of interior design. I've seen a lot of podcasts out there or content out there that talks about interior design in a lot of ways, but what I wanted to talk about was interior product companies. I wanted to show it from a behind the scenes perspective from that interior product company, from a designer perspective in their specification process. And I also wanted to talk about the bridge between the two, how they marry together and the strategies that it takes for everything to be pulled off for sales and built environment, right? So I am just thrilled to have this podcast be heard in 8 countries and counting, and thousands of downloads so far. So I'm excited. But today we are going to get into the topic of Thrive in Design. I named my company Thrive in Design for a reason, and we're going to get into talking about thriving in design or thrive in design in a lot of different ways this season. But today I just wanted to dive into the word thrive, right? The definition of thrive. So I took it all the way to Merriam-Webster dictionary. I know back in the day when I was in grade school, I actually had a paperback or a hardcover dictionary that I would go to. But of course, we're in a technology age, so I Googled it. But when I looked up the definition of thrive, 3 things came up in that definition, which I'm looking forward to breaking down today. The first was to grow vigorously or to flourish. The second was to gain wealth or possessions or to prosper. And the third was to progress toward or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances, right? So before we break down those 3 definitions, I want to acknowledge that it's the beginning of the year. So happy New Year to all of you all that are listening. And when it's the beginning of the year, for me, I like to set my intentions and give the year a word that I will live by for the rest of the year. So my personal word for my personal life, right, for this year is alignment. And I hope that 2023, I will be living more in alignment with the things that I feel I am called to do, right? So if you are listening to this and you you run an interior product company, whatever your word is for your personal life, this year I encourage you to live by the word thrive. So let's dive into the meaning of that word thrive. The first definition that Merriam-Webster gave us was to grow vigorously, right? So for this definition of the word thrive, I really want you to think about revenue goals. Last year, as a company, let's say your goal was to hit $10 million in revenue. So to grow vigorously would mean that you want to achieve more than you did last year. So more than that $10 million. And you could be putting a percentage of growth to that, right? So in setting your intention, you would be saying, I want my interior product company to grow by 10% in 2023. Or maybe it's, I want my interior product company to grow by 20% in 2023. Whatever that percentage is. Or maybe you even break it down by the number of products that you want sold, right? So maybe you sold 2,500 items or products last year and you want to increase that by 500, or you want to increase that by a certain percentage. Whatever it might be, in order to thrive this year, it's super important to start by naming that number that your team will strive towards, right? And you probably already named that number and named that percentage. If you have named that number and named that percentage, and you're on the leadership team of that interior product company, then it's a matter of getting with your sales team and telling them what you're aiming for as a company and what their part of the pie is, right? So if you have a sales team member and a portion of their goal or a portion of your overall company goal is what they will bring to the table, say it's $1 million that they have to bring out of that $10 million in revenue, they need to have clarity in that goal in order for everybody to grow vigorously together, right? And after naming that number and after getting your team clear on what their portion of the pie will be, then it's time to move to the next step. And what is that next step? That next step is thinking about what strategies will be developed and implemented in order to hit or exceed that goal, right? So let's think about that. When you're thinking about strategies, we can think about everything across the board. At Thrive in Design, I really like to think about the customer journey or even the designer's journey with your brand through our proprietary method called ACE the Journey. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you're very familiar with ACE the Journey, and it's really a way of journey mapping a designer's experience with your brand. ACE is an acronym that we use standing for A, appearing. So that's how are you appearing to your customer? C, for consulting, how are you consulting designers? And E, executing, how are you executing the sale, right? So in understanding that customer journey, you can better create or develop and implement strategies to help you hit or exceed your sales goal, right? So out of all of those things, now let's simplify it into two questions about how you're going to develop and implement those strategies, right? So those two questions that I want you to think about is what sales activities had the highest ROI or return on investment last year, right? So go back through all of the initiatives and trade shows, maybe campaigns that you did that had the highest return on investment. And the return on investment can be measured in a few different ways, right? It could have been that the return on investment led to X amount of leads. It could have been that the return on investment led to Y amount of sales, right? It could have meant that that return on investment led to more projects in your pipeline, right? Whatever it was, take a deep dive into the sales activities and the initiatives and which ones of those had the highest ROI last year. Then I want you to look deeper into that and say, how can we repeat that and even amplify it in our approach, in our strategies in 2023? The second question that I want you to ask yourself this year as you are developing and implementing new strategies is, how might we be innovative to catapult us to our goal, right? And I love how might we questions. I know when I was in grad school at SCAD studying design management, we dove into all things design thinking, right? And so when we were posing a research question, we did all this research. And then when we started to come up with solutions to the pain points that we uncovered in our research, we started to ask ourselves, how might we questions, right? To get ourselves to think out of the box and think innovatively. So in the same vein, how might we, meaning you, be innovative to catapult you to your goal this year, right? Because at the end of the day, we know now as we have come through this pandemic that we can't continue to do things the way that we've always done them. We have to be innovative and think outside of the box in order to stand out in this industry, in order for designers to recognize us, and in order for more sales to come in, or to even really stay relevant. So as you're moving towards creating and implementing strategies, ask yourself that how might we question? How might we be innovative to catapult us to our goal, right? So those were two questions that you ask yourself when you're thinking strategically. What sales activities had the highest ROI last year? Do a deep dive into those. And then how can we amplify those? Repeat those and amplify those. And then that second question is what we just talked about. All right. So that was the first part of the definition of thrive, to grow vigorously. The second part of that definition is to gain wealth or possessions, according to our dear friend Merriam-Webster. So for this one, we could easily tie this definition into revenue again, right? We could talk about revenue all day long. But in the vein of talking innovatively today, I actually want to change this definition so that we could think about it from another perspective, especially when it comes to A&D sales, interior products, the built environment, and all that jazz. So I'm going to redo this definition to say, instead of to gain wealth or possessions, let's say to gain authentic relationships and specifications, right? Because when it comes to A&D sales, that's really how you thrive. That is the main 80%, and that's a figurative percentage. 80% of what your sales team is doing is relying on those authentic relationships and specifications, period, right? So as we move through this season, we're going to be talking more and more about this point specifically, but I want to take a moment to rest on this, right? How will your sales team continue to build authentic relationships? And this is important too, because I have also seen reps or leaders think of building relationships as, I'm going to be the rep that shows up often and talks about my products all the time, right? That's not building a relationship. That is really just like being salesy. And sometimes if you overdo it, can come off as pestering the client, right? You don't want to do that. Instead, you want to be building authentic relationships. At the end of the day, yes, we are selling products. Yes, we are trying to reach our revenue goal, but we also are just relating to people, right? And that is what is amplifying our sales. If we have authentic and really good relationships with people, they like us, those designers are going to keep coming back to us, right? They like us, we service them well. And then on top of that, we also are creating or providing them a great product and a great experience in their specification and in their design journey. So when I say that the definition of thrive in this instance is to gain authentic relationships and specifications, is to really lean in on how are we relating to people this year, especially in all of the things that our world has been through over the last, I would say 3 years, but we can even take it to eternity if we really think about it. So that's the point I want to make on that. But we're going to talk about that as we get through this season. The next definition of thrive that we're going to talk about today, and what we saw in that dictionary definition, is to progress towards a goal despite of or because of a circumstance. And I love that. Despite of or because of. Because what I think about that is like, despite of lets me know that a circumstance was in the way or a hurdle was in the way. And even though it was in front of you, you still were able to thrive, right? When I hear because of, I think of, okay, maybe that circumstance was there and it really like raised you up, or it gave you an opportunity to like be disruptive in terms of your innovation. So that's what I think of when I hear despite of and because of. And I also think more formally in a business mindset of a SWOT analysis, right? So SWOT analysis is basically a chart, of course, that you can do to outline the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that your business has. And every interior product company, every sales rep of every interior product company should be doing a SWOT analysis on a regular basis, right? But on a granular level, let's think about just the threats when you're considering progressing towards your revenue goals, despite of or because of circumstances. So let's call those circumstances, in this case, external and internal threats, right? And you can do a deep dive into what threats you might be facing in 2023 to reach that number that you set earlier in this episode, or maybe even at the end of last year. So some external threats that may affect your business could be literally everything outside of your business, right? Hello, inflation, right? Everything is expensive right now. I know for me, an avocado is outrageous to me right now, everything. And when it comes to interior products, it could be the cost of raw materials has gone up, the cost of shipping those raw materials to your facility, the cost of shipping the final product from your facility to maybe a distributor, to maybe a distribution center that you have for your company, maybe the job site, and then the cost of manufacturing and the cost of labor. All of that might be affecting the cost of your product. So those are external threats that may be affecting your business. Some other external threats might be value engineering, right? So in the design world, your team has worked all along with those authentic relationships, building authentic relationships with landing specifications. And then it gets to the final stage after the bidding and after the bid has been awarded when they realize, hey, we are over budget. We need to VE or value engineer this project to make sure that we stay within the budget. How can we get the design intent without the cost, right? So that's another external threat. Another external threat right now might be project timelines. So because of the inflation going up, projects are going on hold, I've seen, for a lot of commercial projects. So how will that affect your goals for this year? And then on top of that, it's just everything happening in the world, right? There's politics, there's wars, there's who knows what. The list goes on. So think about all the external threats that may affect your business this year and how are you going to progress towards your goal despite of or because of those circumstances. And then you can think of internal threats that may affect your business. What are some of those internal threats that may affect your business? Is it that you have outdated sampling out in the field or lack of new sampling to put in the field? Does your operations need to be fine-tuned? Are you understaffed? Are you overstaffed? Oh my gosh, I've seen companies that are overstaffed. They have too many people doing the exact same job. So everybody is conflicting each other, right? So do a deep dive into all of those threats and think of how will you thrive and move towards your goal despite of or because of these threats and circumstances. And I can't answer that for you, but now is your time to think creatively, right? So what did we just dive into? We talked about what it means to thrive in design and really what it means to thrive. And we looked at the 3 definitions of the word thrive according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Those 3 definitions were to grow vigorously or to flourish, to gain wealth or possessions or to prosper. And we changed that second definition to gain authentic relationships and specifications. The third definition was to progress toward or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. So as you think about how you are going to thrive and use that word as your intention for the year, for your interior product company, for your sales team, I hope that you thrive. And may 2023 be prosperous. And I can't wait to talk about all of these things in more depth over the next few episodes. So I hope you enjoyed. See you soon. Thanks for joining us this week on Thrive in Design. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Thrive in Design. And for more strategies on how your product company can innovate in the interior design industry, head to training.thriveindesign.co. As always, subscribe to the show to catch every new episode and leave us a review so we can continue to create captivating content. See you next week.